first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up your class to add your students. So we're going to go to the ODMS website. And you already reset the password, right? It's the first one. That's your email. You need to do it on here too, right? You don't have any students yet. Okay. I'm gonna log you out of there. So the way we are going to add students to your class is we're going to go to the manage, the last one, and then up at the top you're going to fill in all of these. Select the year, your school, and then you don't have a class, so we're going to go ahead and add a class. But it did have a class for you over here. Hold on. Go back up to right there, BS assessments. Select a class. Okay. Then, okay, so you do have a BAS class. So let's go ahead and see why it's not registering over here. Oh, there's your class. So then we're going to manage your roster, and what we have to do is we have to find all your students from your class. And add them. So you could start with your Have you done this? I started it. You just kind of go in alphabetical order, and then here it's going to ask you a set of questions. English language learner, school program. If it's not checked, they checked these last year, so it's going to stay the same. Okay. So you would just add. Take it to the 20 and I'll get this set up first. Okay, you should have 20 on your roster. We'll just go up and check just to make sure. Done. And then 20. Okay, so up here, once you have the assessments done for your students, their assessments are going to show up here with their reports. You'll be able to check that out by selecting a student. And right now, of course, it's going to be blank. There's nothing on there to run the reports. So for now, we can be done with this website. The next thing is going to be to log in here. your students are there now. Should have all your students on here. Do you have any students who are new to the district? No. Okay, perfect. So you don't have to do the getting started. You're going to already know based on their Fontes and Pinnell folders what level they're on.
Okay.
So if we look at their folders, this student ended the year on an O.
Okay. What is the difference? I was wondering.
This is their instructional level. So this is the level where which is what we want to find for the students. We want to find where is their instructional level because that's where we're going to be instructing at in the classroom. Their independent level, this is where they can read on their own. They don't need help to read, nor do they need help to comprehend. They're reading fluently.
So it could be different.
It's so usually it's going to be different. So the O is a level higher, so that's why it's the instructional. If you test a student on the level O and it's an independent level, then you're going to go up to P to see if that's their instructional level. So you always keep going until you get to an instructional level. And the same is going to be true, for example, if you're testing them at an O and it's a hard, then you have to go down a level. For whatever reason, this might not happen with you because all your students have already been tested and assessed in the district. A lot of times what happens here is when we have to start from scratch with the students, we do a word list and they have to check off, count how many words they have, and then that's where we start them in the assessment. And sometimes they can do great on the word list, but then they get to the reading and it's hard on them. It's hard for them. So then that's when we have to start moving down. Now that we have their levels, my suggestion would be to start a level up. Because the hope is that over the summer they've read and they've made progress. So I would start on P for her. So all your students go to the instructional level and then find the level up. And that's where we're going to start the assessment process. So then the assessments are in the box. And it's, your box is so organized. That's
really.
So then you have, your books are in order from the level, so then you would go and find for this student, for example, the P. Oh, it's not going to be in this box. You're going to have to go to the BAS assessment system 2. So anything over N, you're going to have to go to the second box.
Over N?
Over N.
Okay.
Go to the next box. And that box, there's 2 on campus. We'll have to get with Vicki if you need it.
Okay.
It's going to be like a lot of those teachers are going to want to use it, so it's going to be spread out thin. I would assess what you can using this box. Save those for the end. Those may take you not as long because the reading is the level is higher and the fluency is higher. But you may not have a lot on this system because so you have an R, so you're going to go to S and N.
Same there.
So you would need the other box. So 1, you have L.
So I'll just make a list of them, right? And it'll be easier to make a list of them.
So the best way I found was to go start a level L, which students need to be assessed starting there. Level M, which students need to be assessed starting there. That way I call all of those kids. I have the book out. I'm ready. I have that stuff prepared. I can test by the level. It just seems to go by faster than having to switch things here and there.
Right.
Switch from the boxes here and there.
Instead of going down the roster.
Because then you'll be all over the place. I would group them by the level and assess from there. Okay. So once you start assessing, this is the next part. We use our iPads to assess everything. It's in your, yes. Oh, no. Here it is. Just kind of stuck down there. Got curled up. These will go over later. So, here are the coding errors, which is awesome. Your teacher did a good job. She put this on there for you. So this is where you would start as far as coding the errors of the students. When you do paper pencil, you have to take annotation of all of this. Okay. It's a little bit more limited when we're using the iPad because everything, it's all on a setting on there. Mm-hmm. So we'll practice maybe doing some of those on the iPad. You might want to make a copy of this to keep at hand. Mm-hmm. There's a more extensive version of it on page, it's not in this book. I can get it for you, but for the most part, those are going to be all your errors. This book over here has them a little bit more elaborate for the multiple different, multiple substitutions. So how would you code that? How many errors is it? And for the most part, it's going to be one error per substitution. So if they say a word for his, they say little, that's one. Some, that's one. Him, that's one. The best thing about doing it on the iPad is that it's going to count everything for you. It's going to count the errors, it's going to count the self-corrections. All you have to do is go in, and as they're reading, you're listening to them read, and you're just marking as it goes. So let's practice going through each of the errors. So you can have, so the good thing about this is if we were to practice on a student, if you want to take it home and practice on your son, you can delete the assessment. Okay. So that might be something that is helpful. If you go home and have him read and you can practice assessing him, you can delete it. Okay. That way you have some practice. So you're going to add an assessment and you will start. And at this point, for the student, you have to already have the book ready. Okay. So let's say, for example, that Susanna is at a J. Per the district guidelines, at this first assessment, we're going to only use the fiction. In previous years, we've been able to say, okay, choose which one you want. And sometimes the rationale behind that is that they're going to pick what's interesting to them, so they're going to do better. But to make sure that they read both genres, it's fiction now, nonfiction in the middle of the year, and then fiction again at the end of the year.
I remember them saying something about if they
have already
on, like fiction. Do we start with nonfiction?
This year, no, we start on fiction.
Always fiction.
Yes.
Start with fiction. Okay.
So then, let's say she's on a J, you're going to choose the category first, and it's always the BAS. It's always going to be the 3rd edition.
And BAS is?
Benchmark Assessment System.
And it's
third edition after that. Oh. Okay, we need to update your BS third edition. That's loading on your phone. Now we should be able to. So select BS third edition, and then the level J, and then fiction. And it's going to show you the book.
okay.
So then you start the new conference. So at this point, you present the book to the student and you say, I'm going to ask you to read this book today. And you set it in front of them. You're going to read them this introduction. The introduction is right here for you to read off the iPad. I always tell the students, follow along as I'm reading, because you might see some words in there that you'll see in the story, especially like the proper nouns. If they don't know the proper nouns, and then they struggle with those proper nouns, and then it's wrong every single time.
Right.
So I read them the introduction. You can't have a discussion about it, even though some kids would love to. And then you just click next. It's going to take you to the assessment.
Okay.
So read intro, click next. So this is the assessment, and it's going to have all the pages, all the words for the pages as you're going through. As the books get harder in the level, you'll get to a point where they read up to, for example, this one is read up to page 9, and then once they get here, it says have the students finish reading the book silently.
Okay.
So then you would stop. When we have it pressed on, you would push the stop, and then they would continue reading on their own silently. Some of them read out loud.
So we're recording them.
You can record them.
Okay.
It's helpful to record them, especially if you have students who read really fast, or even students who read really slow, and you need to go back and see, okay, what did they say, or if you couldn't understand them. So it is helpful to record them. Just keeping in mind you can only save 10 students at a time, and that includes the recording. So once you completely finalize the assessment for your student, it's going to delete the recording. Another good thing with the recording is if you have any students who are struggling and you want to present to the parents, this is how they read over this assessment, this is what I'm seeing, it might be helpful for parents to hear the student reading as well. So, but again, it only saves up to 10 at a time. So here what we would do is we're going to go ahead and start, and we'll just go down the list of the important errors so that we can kind of hit them. That's going to be the most important thing. After the coding and the scoring of it will be much easier. It's just keeping up with how to code the different errors.
Okay, so like here it says the multiple misreadings of proper noun. So if they say it wrong more than one time, it's still just one error.
It's still just one, and for proper nouns, you're not going to count them wrong after the first time.
Okay.
So I said earlier it would be wrong every single time, but it's actually not an error. Okay. So we wouldn't mark it, especially just on here. On paper pencil, you're able to say, okay, well, she still didn't get this proper noun right, and make an annotation. But if you do it here, it's going to count it every single time.
Okay.
So on here, proper nouns once, and then let it go. Okay, so then we would start. I'm not going to record this time. So the clock is going. You see the clock up here. Let me just show you one thing before we get into the actual errors.
Okay.
So let's say that this student, even though it says she's ready for this level, you give it to her and she just can't. Eventually, I'm gonna make it that she misses so many.
Okay.
So that you can see.
So when you tap on it, that shows
Mhm.
it's not.
Eventually, you're going to see this little heart, a little red. Substitution. I'm just kind of making her have all these errors.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, this little a red flashing will start there.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get that red flashing,
Mm-hmm.
you can stop the assessment. The book's too hard for her. Okay. There's no sense in having the child struggle more.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to just stop and then go down a level.
Okay.
So we have an L, we would go down, a J, we would go down to the level below it.
Okay.
So we'd get the I. Okay, so let me undo. Oh. Okay, so you're going to need a really good stylus. Perfect.
I don't know if it's a good one, but try it.
Let's say this little toggle right here is where you're going to record all of the errors, and it's really just like you push down lightly and you just move around, and you see that little green thing is going around it.
Oh, yes.
It's moving. That's where you're going to end up marking it.
Oh, I see.
So the SC stands for self-correct.
Uh-huh.
The T for told.
Okay, so we can tell.
You can tell them a word if they appeal for the word, but it's an error. If they're not appealing and they're just sitting there and they've sat there for 5 seconds, you can just say, continue reading. Just kind of, politely say, it's okay to keep going, try the next word or something. And then in that case, you would count that as an O for omission.
Oh, okay.
The INS is insertion. The SUB is substitution. And the P is for processing. The student is processing the word, they're sounding it out, but then they get it correct. The P is not going to mark them as an error. Okay. So it turns it yellow. It's not an error, it's just kind of letting you know for your own documentation purposes later, that was their processing. They were processing that word. If they're just kind of looking at it, saying the sounds, trying to make it out, then they're processing. Okay. If they are saying something, it's a good idea, even though they're processing, they're not appealing to you, they're not asking you for help, they're not looking around the room, but they're saying or ink, morning. Then I like to document that and show, that's what they did. More. They kind of processed, they've chunked it, and then they said it. They said the word. Because that tells you a lot about the student as a reader, that they're able to chunk the word and find, what they need. They knew what to do. I would go ahead and document that at the on here, and then call that a processing. It's not going to count it wrong. Okay. They read it correctly. Yeah. So we can go from there, from processing. Okay. And then we can do substitution. So a substitution is when it gives an incorrect response. For this example says, for the word Kate, she said her. That's an error. Okay. So we would, let's take, for example, Saturday. The student says Sunday. Okay, that's not correct. Right. We would then put our stylus on the word that they're subbing for, and make sure that our little toggle, we would get our little toggle, make sure it's on the green for sub, and it's going to show you what they substituted the word. Okay. When you run reports later, you're going to have all of that shown. Okay.
So we always want to document what they subbed for.
What they substituted for. Okay. So that's a substitution without, they just kept going. On Sunday morning, Ben saw an envelope, and they didn't recognize it. They didn't correct anything. Okay. Let's say on Sunday morning, Ben saw an envelope on his instead of the, let's say he says, the student says his. Okay. They subbed it, substitution, but right away the student said the front steps. So they self-corrected. So then you would highlight the same word and then, oops, it's sensitive, it's very sensitive. So then go to the self-correct and it's going to change it from the red strikeout to green.
Okay.
And it's not an error, but you do want to document that it was a self-correction.
Okay.
You know, he said his, but then he self-corrected because, again, that tells you a lot about the student as a reader.
Right.
They're making the self-corrections that they need to understand what they're reading. So if we have multiple substitutions, the student makes several attempts at a word. Write each word of the substitution in the sequence above the word. So 1 error for each incorrect word in text. For each incorrect word in the text. So that's really important because it's not going to count the student as an error. For example, here, little, some, him, it's not 1, 2, 3, it's 1. One error for each incorrect word in text, in the text. But we do want to document that the student did that. So, for example, and we would just do it exactly like it has it there. So, let's say he said front. For the word front, he said from, for, first. And then he substituted it. And then you're seeing, okay, he's understanding the first initial sounds. It's now trying to get him to read the rest of the word. To problem solve the rest of that word. So he's using initial sounds to help him with the reading.
Got it.
Now, if it's a self-correct, we would do the same thing. Document steps. Let's say storm, some, and then she gets it right. So I would sub it and then self-correct it. So you see where, like, at least for the first few times that you're testing the students, recording is going to help you because you may not be able to keep up with some of the readers, especially our students who are so advanced. They're going to be reading, so it may be helpful if they make, you know, if they're great readers, but they do make errors, and it would be helpful to have it on the recording.
That makes perfect sense.
Another really important one, okay, we went over the multiple misreadings, multiple misreadings of a word, of a proper noun. Again, you would do the same thing with your finger, document what they said. It's a substitution error for the first time. Every time after, don't count it wrong.
And that will count.
It will count. The first one will count, the rest of them won't. So it's going to be 1 error first time miss, no errors after that. So then another one that you're will most likely see a lot is I'm trying to find an example here. The contractions. They tend to, like, there. Okay, they tend to initially read it as they are. Or the inverse. If it has, the word is, it is, they say it's. So then it would only be 1 error. Let me sub it. And it's 1 error. The self-correction, we talked about that up here, where you just kind of document, and then it highlights it green there to let you know that it was counted as a self-correct, and it's not an error.
And you just put check mark for self-correction, right?
Well, no, you're going to show, for example, let's say here they said bad, and you're going to put the sub first. That's what he said, and then he's like, Dad, self-correct. So he said bad, and then right away he fixed it. So you're going to document what he initially said, and then document that it was immediate self-correct. It gets really fun when they keep reading, and then they realize it 5 words later, and they reread the whole sentence, and then they correct it. So then there's a whole nother set of repetition. How do we mark a repetition? How do we mark that they repeated a word? And there are no errors. So at these first few times it may, like, don't get overwhelmed because those things are not, the repetitions are more for us.
Okay.
How is the student reading those repetitions? Are we seeing that it's slowing down the fluency? Is it impeding the comprehension? But they're not counted as errors.
Okay.
So the scoring of it won't be hindered if you say, okay, I missed that repetition. It's not going to affect how he's ranked or how he scores at the end, or the student scores.
Perfect.
Insertion. Okay, so an insertion is, let's say he's reading. Dad read the note that was inside. Hello, my neighbors. So let's say he says my and inserts the word my between hello and neighbors.
Right.
You would tap on the word before the insertion.
Okay.
And then you just put your finger there and it's up to insertion. And that's going to be one error. One error per word inserted. So if he says, hello, my favorite neighbors, like they get really inventive, then you would put in another insertion. So then that's going to be 2. Okay. The next one is the omissions. And those are real simple. Let's say he just said, we moved into the big house. So he forgot the word just. Just go down.
Okay.
Down. It's the omission. And the good thing is that the iPad is documenting everything for you. Where when we first started, we had to do everything pencil paper. We had the calculator and everything like that. So it was a little bit difficult. But then it got easier. Okay, so now we're going on to the repetitions. And repeated words, repeat one word. So let's say the student, and we sometimes have these students where they just repeat the word again and again. They're processing what they're reading, they're understanding what they're reading. If he says, we want to, then you highlight want, and you just click that. And you see how it's showing you if he went back and reread it.
Yes.
If the student says, we want, says it 3, every time they repeat it, you just click it.
Okay.
And that's pretty simple.
Okay.
Repeated repetitions, went over that, and it's going to show you there. Repeated repetitions, again, it's no error. Okay. Rereading. So these are our words is rereading words. So that's when the student rereads more than one word. Goes back to the beginning of the sentence. Like I said earlier, when they make an error and then they realize it and they go all the way back, I mean, that's good reading. We want them to do that because we want them to understand it in full context. So the rereading returns to the beginning of the sentence or phrase to read again. So then let's say he says, let's say it's the same sentence. We want to meet you. And he kind of loses his train of thought, or she loses his train of thought, and then goes back to the sentence. You would first repeat words, and you see how it's kind of blinking, so it's showing you, okay, it's ready. You're going to click here, and then click here, and then click here, and it will show you how they went from here all the way back to we. And then in between there, he had that repeated repetition. Sometimes in between that, you have a self-correction or you have an error. They might, let's say, for example, this student had initially read met. But then in the rereading, they fixed it. Well, always give them credit for that so that they can earn that.
Do you use a stylus?
I do.
You do?
I do. But
this one
that one, right now my fingers are
this
working.
one wasn't very good?
We need to get a good one.
But I need to find a good one. And I use my finger.
You do? You can keep up? It's time?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll, you're pretty much set.
Okay.
If you want to go from here, I'm sorry, take your whole time. If you want to start looking at these, then if you have questions about these are pretty much more self-explanatory. Again, they're the no errors.
Okay.
So,
I should have probably sat here with you because I was kinder.
We'll show you the video.
You're like, you can see it.
You can watch the video.
No. But I mean, I have that. I mean,
You can do it, yeah. The only one here on the toggle is going to be the T for told.
Okay.
And that is going to be an error.
Okay.
Like I said, if you tell them the word want, then it's going to count as an error, and it's going to show there that you told them.
Okay.
Okay?
Perfect.
because it's longer, right? Second grade.
Hoy yo no me voy a poner a hacer y pasé una cosa, compramos